Hey everybody, welcome back to Go Read Some Comics with me, Professor Jenna. Happy New Year! I'm kicking things off with my breakdown of the penultimate episode of Creature Commandos Season 1. I really dug everything about this episode. We got way more in the present day than we did in previous weeks, and the characterization was just so strong and so fun across the board. There is a surprising amount to talk about, so let's dive in. Week after week, I think to myself, this is the darkest origin story that this show is going to have, and then the subsequent week just continues to prove me wrong. I was really floored by Phosphorus' backstory and the perverse tragedy of what Rupert Thorne puts him through. Created by Steve Englehart and Walt Simonson in 1977's Detective Comics 469, Phosphorus' comic origin is a little less sympathetic, for lack of a better term. He colludes with Rupert to build a nuclear power plant in Gotham, but is met with opposition from the citizens of Gotham for environmental reasons. He builds the plant offshore and accidentally falls into the nuclear reactor and gains his superpowers from there. He then sets out for revenge against the city council, against Batman, and against all of Gotham, eventually poisoning their water supply and suffocating an arena full of concert goers.
This whole concert? It's a trap.
Batman fights him multiple times, and Phosphorus eventually falls to his death, only to be revived a few decades later in the Underworld Unleashed storyline, where he sold his soul to the demon Neron. Since then, he's fought Starman and Man-Bat and joined the secret society of supervillains. Amid the nuclear age of the 1970s, it really made sense to introduce Phosphorus as an opportunist who was ignoring people's environmental concerns. But in a modern context, and especially in the context of Creature Commandos, I love the decision to make his story so much more heartbreaking and endearing, and then push him to the point of being completely deranged. The motivation of a family history of cancer and his wife's experience as an immigrant were really poignant to me, even more so because Thorne and his goons just basically laugh in the face of it. The inciting incident of him getting superpowers is also reminiscent of Dr. Manhattan and Watchmen, with its own sort of flourishes. Him then being driven to the point of brutally killing people with 2 middle fingers in the air is an outlandish escalation of his feelings, but it's still kind of an understandable one as a viewer. He's one of the few members of the team, and possibly the only, depending on how Nina's backstory is held, who was transformed into a monster instead of being born as one. And that is just a fascinating stance through which to explore his character. Rupert Thorne was also created by Englehart and Simonson in Detective Comics 469 and has a somewhat recurring history of being a corrupt politician in Gotham. His quest for power leads him to run for mayor and ultimately not get elected, and torture and seemingly kill Hugo Strange in an attempt to get Batman's secret identity. We also get a reference to the fictional country of Bialia, which was created by Keith Giffen, J.M. DeMatteis, and Kevin Maguire in 1987's Justice League No. 2. The Middle Eastern country has ties to a number of costume characters, including the Dan Garrett incarnation of Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, Red Tornado, Queen Bee, Black Adam, and Talia al Ghul. Who knows if any of these connections will carry over into the DCU? Probably not Black Adam's, because it involved him being mind-controlled into killing the entire country, but it'll probably be better than how it was used in Wonder Woman 1984. And of course, I have to talk about the most important character referenced in this episode, Bat-Mite. I'm joking, but I'm not. Created by Bill Finger and Sheldon Moldoff in 1959's Detective Comics 267, Bat-Mite is an interdimensional imp similar to Superman's Mr. Mxyzptlk, with an extremely parasocial hero-worship relationship to Batman. He parades around in his own Batman costume and absurdly powerful abilities, often trying to orchestrate events for Batman's attention. In 1964, when DC editor Julie Schwartz tried to revamp Batman as more grounded and gritty, Bat-Mite essentially disappeared from continuity altogether, not returning until the next century to team up with Mixie in the 2000s. Grant Morrison's Batman run recontextualized him even further as a hallucination of Bruce's when he thinks he's losing his mind. Economos did mention Bat-Mite in season 1 of Peacemaker, which was one of my favorite deep cut references at the time, so I love seeing that hammered home even further now that the sandbox is so much wider. I have a feeling that if and when we do see Bat-Mite on screen, it is going to be wild. Okay, but seriously, let's get to Batman and Gotham. I immediately love the aesthetic that we got for Gotham City. We've got gargoyles and underpasses and different types of architecture in a way that scratches my Chicago is Gotham itch, but it still feels like a canvas that can have so many more things added to it as the DCU goes on. And yes, I could have safely assumed that we would have seen Batman in this episode, especially when it's technically not his first appearance in the show. In the Rotten Tomatoes video for this episode, James simply said that this is the DCU Batman, but after all of the previous scuttlebutt over whether or not Robert Pattinson's Batman is carrying over to the DCU, I hope this episode puts at least some of that discourse to bed. I won't get too far into the weeds about how I feel about it. There's an entire episode of my podcast Phase Hero devoted to it, but I will just say that I want both the Reevesverse and the DCU's Gothams to thrive in whatever way that they need to. I personally feel like a radioactive skeleton dancing around in a zoot suit is a little too much of a leap for Pattinson, but it could fit a more weird and fantastical Gotham that's already filled with Batman and the Bat family. The prospect of getting the family on screen without the extremes of them either just starting out or already all being dead excites me more than words can express. It's become a beloved part of the comics for a reason, and it's one of the last big parts of Batman that we still haven't seen on screen. So I hope that's what we're eventually headed towards, because this Gotham looks like the perfect playground for it. Also, I just need to say that I love how prevalent metahumans already are in the DCU, to the point where there are dirty magazines and establishments having rules in place for superpowers. A part of me still has PTSD from how the Arrowverse took years to realize that there were metahumans outside of Central City, and the DCEU still treated metahumans like an anomaly that we're all eventually destined to put on a costume. I love the idea of some people just having superpowers and only using them to be a low-level creep or an otherwise unassuming person. The MCU started to do this a little bit with She-Hulk, but there's still so much more narrative fun to have there. I'm also curious if, in canon, the women in the dirty magazine are the actual characters themselves or just women in costumes, because either one has really interesting implications for how superheroism and celebrity is handled in the universe. The two women on the inside of the magazine, which I definitely cannot show in this video, look an awful lot like Golden Age debutante turned crime fighter Lady Luck, and an amalgam of the classic and modern designs for the Supergirl and Legion villain Satan Girl. These are just guesses, and they could very well just be random aesthetic choices anyway, but I still had to guess. Overall, this episode was great, and to me it illustrated everything that I love about the show. I particularly loved the sweetness of Weasel's whole little interlude. It reminded me a lot of King Shark and the alien fish in Suicide Squad. I am so sad that this season is almost over, but I'm excited to see it stick the landing, all while probably breaking our hearts with the Nina episode. What did you think of this episode of Creature Commandos? Do you have any predictions going into the finale? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow me on social media at @HeyIt'sJennaLynn. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. It goes a long way with helping this channel. Again, Happy New Year. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, go read some comics.